Just do a couple minutes on who you are and what got you to that stage, and then we're going to dive into all the issues and talk about love and healing crystals and everything else.
Oh, I thought...
So take it away.
Oh yeah, great. So many high-level ideas, high-level orbs, high-level thoughts and ideas. Oh, the orbs, high-level orbs. So many high-level orbs, I don't know what to do. Oh yeah.
So gay men in Los Angeles, in a very real way, gave me my career.
At the first debate, you're kind of going to be the one that most people are talking about. What would you have said?
If that's God's will, then that's God's will.
So in a weird way, does it seem like we're sort of absurdly focused on politics all the time instead of actually what you're talking about, which is more a movement of the people that isn't, it's not necessarily political per se?
Well, I think that's sort of the point. Abolition was a moral stance. Women's suffrage was a moral stance. And the same with civil rights. It wasn't the political establishment that caused it. It was the moral stance articulated by Martin Luther King in the civil rights movement. And that is my point regarding what is needed today. We have been living for the last 40 years under what is, I believe, an illusion that a trickle-down economics where all that a corporation has to do is exercise fiduciary responsibility towards its stockholders, even if that's at the expense of other stakeholders like workers or the community or the environment, without any sense of moral or ethical responsibility to anything beyond that fiduciary responsibility.
A lot of that's coming out of the left and from the Democrats, this labeling of everyone as racist.
Well, I hear you, and you're leaving out a very important factor, which is that the president, at least based on his tweets and his comments, this president says things and is involved in it right now, which by any measure are racist comments. Certainly understand what you mean about how the public square is a place where it's almost impossible to have a conversation these days, although you just need to not be on Twitter too much. You know, there are places that just make that worse. Ways in which social policy, economic policy, criminal policy is tinged by obvious racial prejudice. There is no doubt about that.
So can you give me an example of that?
Yes. You could take white people and black people use drugs at the same rate, but a black person is liable to get a far harsher sentence for the same drug offense. So there is racial disparity throughout our criminal sentencing. Another example is there are millions of American children who go to school every day in schools that don't even have the adequate school supplies with which to teach a child to read. And if a child cannot learn to read by the age of 8, then the chances of high school graduation are drastically diminished, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. These children live, many of them, in what's called America's domestic war zones.
As someone that I despise identity politics, I think it is what has, it's the root of almost everything that is wrong right now, which is why I'm struggling so much with what I would say is my former team, let's say. There was a certain collective guilt to what you were saying that was really troubling to me. I was really struggling when I was watching it.
Okay. So
not that your intentions were not good, you know what I mean? But that the idea of these sort of guilt-ridden white people, many of whom probably, well, certainly none of them in that room owned slaves, and probably many of them never came from descendants of slaves, nor would I think that you're guilty for your father's sins, much less your great-grandfather's sins, et cetera. There was a certain collective guilt to it that struck me as scary. Does that ring with you?
No, not at all, but I'll tell you why.
Great.
There's a difference between taking blame and taking responsibility. The German nation has paid $89 billion to Jewish organizations since World War II. And by the time they started paying those reparations, it was the generation after the war. Many of the people who started paying those reparations were children during that war. Nobody was saying...
But it was to the people who survived, not to generations after.
Absolutely. It was to Jewish organizations. Absolutely. Absolutely. It wasn't just to the people who survived. And let's talk about how few survived, okay?
Yeah.
So, relation to another.
But do you think there's
apologize. I'm sorry.
Well, do you think there's a little bit of a risk in sort of, I mean, a couple of times you're referencing the genocide of the Jews to slavery. Seems like a little bit of a slippery slope there, no?
I don't even know how we can say that, actually, and I say that as a Jew. Have you read up much on slavery?
Yeah.
We're talking abject slavery, Dave. I mean, nobody's in a contest. Nobody has a monopoly on human suffering.
Right. Well, I'm not diminishing that, but you can also talk about the extermination of 6 million people and the amount of people that never lived because of that would be alive. Or your ancestors from Russia who were never given anything and came here.
Well, wait a minute. But the Germans have paid reparations. That's kind of my point. The fact that Germany paid reparations, Germany has done full-on mea culpa. Germany has done full-on mea culpa, nothing short of full-on mea culpa, plus reparations, plus a guarantee that every generation theretofore would receive full Holocaust education.
I mean, I don't think I'm guilty of the past of anyone else.
This is not about guilt. It's a difference between taking guilt and responsibility.
So how much would be the right amount then? I mean, how much are we going to hand people?
Okay, so, well, first of all, I hand people. I don't think it's handing people, but I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this.
Yeah.
Because I've been in this conversation long enough to know no matter what number I utter, some are going to say it's too much, some are going to say it's too little.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
There's no magic number here.
Hold on.
Maybe you can get it today.
Let me rev up to this. What I am proposing is between 200 to 500 billion to be dispersed over a period of 20 years.
So there's a couple of things here. So one, I think we also have a sort of disconnect on, and which is fine, completely, on just sort of what government is actually able to do or can do. I just don't think government can sort of do these types of things. I have to say that my brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas. Like it's not, I just don't think it's the purpose of government. I mean, so is the answer that we'd be taxing a first-generation Latino immigrant who just moved here, who's struggling to make ends meet? We're going to tax him and take some of his, we're going to have to tax people to pay for this, right?
No, I don't think, listen. For what I would
the money has to come from somewhere, right? So the guy who just moved here?
The issue is we don't have to tax new people. We need to stop cutting the taxes of the very richest among us. We need to repeal that 2017 tax cut. There was a $2 trillion tax cut that gave 83 cents of every dollar to the very richest earners and corporations under this illusion, this canard about trickle-down economics, even though there's no basis anywhere this is actually going to stimulate the economy. 350 years, because it was 100 years after the Civil War, before the Civil Rights Act. 350 years of institutionalized violence against a people, that's longer than our country has been in existence. So the idea of an economic restitution by the middle of the 20th century, this was considered just civilized behavior.
Thing to do with, we don't have to talk about this within a slavery context or a Holocaust context, but just sort of collectivism as a general rule, that it makes people attach emotions to themselves that have nothing to do with them as an individual.
No, I don't, and that's never been my experience. I've been doing this for many years. You feel in a generation of young Germans so much guilt flushed out. Holocaust guilt has been flushed out. That's what we're talking about. We're ending the guilt. We're talking about getting past this torturous phase that's lasted for hundreds of years.
Right, but also in a weird way, then they opened up, because they have this sort of residual guilt still, they opened up their borders and let in 1.5 million people that then have sort of caused all sorts of other problems with integration and financially and everything else.
You just made a connection between those policies and leftover guilt from the Holocaust. I'm not sure every German or every German scholar or German politician would agree with you about.
Well, I don't think everyone would, but I think many would. That there was a certain guilt that led.
Yeah, but how would you explain that so many other countries over there did it as well?
Well, that would be a whole other conversation about just sort of how the EU operates and sort of globalism and a whole bunch of other things. Do you want to be president, or do you want to be sort of that there should almost be like a side thing next to president, sort of like where in the in many other countries there's a president and a prime minister, where there's sort of.
No, we have a constitution. Yeah. I'm fine with the constitution.
Yeah. And that more spiritually, where a lot of the things you're talking about maybe.
But I believe that for whatever reasons we want to talk about that, and I believe. Well, first of all, the other people who are running are lovely people. That has been.
Me personally would always be leery of the government, because the government is the people that put people in slavery. The government is the thing that exterminated 6 million Jews, et cetera, et cetera.
People we're talking about government doing less today aren't saying small government. They're saying let's just give the money to corporate control. So whereas you're saying you don't want overreach by government, I'm saying what it has turned into in this country, it's code. Less overreach by government has turned into huge overreach by corporate forces. What you have articulated are high-minded conservative principles. And I hope that you feel I've articulated some high-minded liberal principles. The yin and yang between those two is the American mind at its best.
I had Eckhart Tolle in here a couple of weeks ago. He was giving me a version of that.
Yeah.
So you're worried that everything has become too political, right? I mean, I talk about that a lot.
No, I'm worried about what politics has become. It's not that I'm worried that things have become too political. Life is political. All the political means is our collective behavior. When you have 1% of Americans owning more wealth than the bottom 90%, what you've got is what I said before, 40% of Americans who can't even have a shot. We talk about how the economy is good. Who's the economy good for? And we look at the low unemployment rates, but you realize how many people have to work 2-3 jobs a day just in order to pay the rent, for a modest 2-bedroom apartment. There's a huge sea of unnecessary human suffering.
I know you wouldn't want to give it to him, but does Trump deserve some credit for not doing that strike? If he got a call a minute before, and 120 people are going to get killed. I will tell you what I think he does deserve credit for.
Yeah. In terms of Iran, no, it was the president who recklessly removed us from the Iran nuclear deal. That is what led up to that. Environmental Protection Agency now is headed by a former chemical company executive, and before that by a former oil company executive. We have to talk about our food policies and the de-juicing of the FDA. Regulations, safety and health regulations, so there isn't this spewing of carcinogens in our air, spewing of carcinogens and toxins in our water.
Yeah, well, I didn't say I'm a no government guy,
thank you.
But I would try to roll back as many
government.
regulations as possible as a general rule.
Safety regulations, Dave?
Well, no. Okay, a couple more quick. We'll try to do them quick. It seems like everyone's kind of veering to some version of open borders. That's somehow something kind of.
No, you
so
say
tell
you're
me.
a Democrat. Where do you get this?
Well, I don't consider.
You say I'm a Democrat.
No, I don't consider myself a Democrat anymore.
I
don't consider myself a Republican, but I'm definitely not a Democrat.
I have not heard one candidate.
Well, they won't say it, but the policies seem to be.
Oh, you don't say it, but you really. I mean, is that healthy, honorable debate? You say it if you believe it. I don't believe it. You can have healthy.
No, I take them at their word, and it seems to me that the policies ultimately are.
Why? Why? If you say we should have proper security at the border, but that is going to take. Remember, the president has closed a lot of the ports of entry. That is what has created so much of the squeeze here, because he's closed so many of the border entry points. Of course, we need border enforcement. Of course, we need more judges. Of course, we need more agents. Of course, seeking asylum is not a crime. It's a statutory right. This is a basic to the American heart. If we stop being...
But what about the people that aren't coming through the proper channels? I'm with you. Seeking asylum, of course, is not. And especially people that are seeking it from truly tyrannical regimes, et cetera, et cetera.
He's made it harder and harder for people to come through proper channels by closing more of the so-called proper channels. This is a made-up thing. This is what dictators do. This is what authoritarian figures do. He's found a group of powerless people, and he can scapegoat them and make them the enemy, when in fact, the immigrant in the United States does as much for us as we do for the immigrant.
You would want the government to be able to tell me, tell my company what?
No, because we're in Los Angeles and you can afford $15 an hour theoretically.
Well, right, but it's not about what I can theoretically afford or not.
Yes, it is.
All right, one more.
Okay.
Healing crystals.
What's
the story?
I have to tell you.
What's the deal? I was going to burn some incense before you got here. We were going to do a seance. I have a Ouija board over there.
I have the word orb. Everything is orbs. I don't think I ever even kind of knew the word orb before. I think it's something in a photograph. I love geodes. We all ought to think very deeply. There's a reason why a certain group of people want me to be seen as wacky. There is a political media industrial complex in this country.
Did you enjoy what you just watched and now crave more nectar of the damned? Did you know that if you're watching on YouTube, you're only getting half the surfy experience? We upload all of our content commercial and censorship free to our Patreon. Due to the general demonetization of our videos, we now upload half of our original content directly to those who can help us produce this show. Want even more nectar than that? Well, come join us at twitch.tv/TheSerfsTV, where we do weekly live streams, debates, interviews, AMAs, and more. If you're an Amazon Prime member, you can help support our show 100% free by subscribing to our Twitch channel. So come join us, be merry, and know that your support is helping us do great things.
Like pay rent and eat.
Our quote this week comes from Aelith Twinning, who says, "Elected officials are manufactured personalities and celebrities, or we are only permitted to take emotional stands on issues that do not affect corporate power." By Bertram M. Gross, Friendly Fascism, the New Face of Power in America.